Welcome to my updated video on the Boneshatter Juggernaut. I know this is kind of last minute, but I decided since this is the build I'm going with, I want to give you guys more information, everything I'm working with here, so that way, if you're faster than me or you can't watch on stream and basically follow what I'm doing, you'll have some information to work with on your own time, and you'll have answers to questions I can't give if I've stopped streaming, stuff like that. I figured it would be important to put this out here. So to start off with, I made a non-cluster tree and a cluster tree, so that way, initially, when we are league starting, we're not going to have budget for clusters. Clusters aren't going to exist, so I wanted to give an example of a tree I would do if I'm not grabbing clusters, and that's what I ended up coming up with here. I had a decent amount of passes to work with, because with clusters, I end up planning to use about... actually quite a bit of passives here. It's about 20 passives, so there's a lot more we can work with on the tree if we're not using clusters. And what I ended up deciding is we actually can get some pretty good crit investment. I noticed we're next to some very high value crit nodes being a staff build, both on this wheel here, and this wheel here. That ended up making me think, you know what, crit could end up being viable. The reason is, PoE the Cage God, we can get to about 6.4 base crit. We can include an Assassin's Mark via cast when damage taken, thanks to trauma. That'll take us to, I think Assassin's Mark gives like 1.5 base crit. That'll take us to an 8 base crit. And then with something like increased crit strikes as one of our supports, it's actually a pretty decent support at this point. That could take us to about 10 base crit. And then we can get some good crit chance on the tree. There's some decent crit we could end up with. I thought for 10, 15 passives of investment, I thought that's actually some pretty high value. I'm looking into that. Also, another change I thought about more, I was looking at Impale. Impale support was seeming less and less valuable due to the changes, but there is still a lot of value in Impale, and I didn't want to just ignore it. So I ended up deciding what I want to go with are these staff nodes here, for 3 points, and then Impaler node. The reasoning behind this is it's a way where we can barely invest into Impale and still get some high value out of it. So we basically have like a 30% chance to impale, so every 3 hits we'll impale them, and when we do, we'll impale them for 5 hits. And thanks to us playing with Harpooner, this means we get 20% impale effect with enemies that aren't impaled, and we get all the value, all the juicy value out of that. And I think that's a pretty cool combination to still get some value out of Impale without investing into it much at all. I thought that's a pretty good snag there, so that's one of the things I went with. And on the rest of the tree, it's pretty much about life and strength. I ended up going for a Might of the Meek here, which I think is very high value. Not sure how expensive this will be early on. It'll probably be mid-grade, 10, 20, 30 C would be my guess. I'm not sure, but it gives us a lot of strength and a lot of life. I really like this Might of the Meek. And on the other jewel sockets, I'd recommend just going for rares with resistances and life first. Maybe accuracy is a decent stat to look for. Eventually, we'll be looking at a Lethal Pride somewhere like here for percent strength nodes, but that's not till later, given Lethal Pride is not available early on in the league. Another thing I wanted to take note of is I had a lot of people asking about gem links. And there's just some other notes I put in here, like Anointment Advice, Cluster Jewel Notables I'd recommend, stuff like that. I decided to make a little note section here for you guys, so that way you get a quick access to gem links and stuff I thought would be decent. This isn't going to be finalized. Obviously, when I play with the build, I'm going to test out different things, see what works, see what doesn't work, and I'll adjust this accordingly, and I'll give you updated guides each day at the end of the day when I finish playing for the day. But here, this is just some general information you can make use of. One important thing I would like to point out is early on, right when you start the game, we're not going to have a Pillar of the Cage God until we can buy it. But the reality is, I keep saying that word. Anyways, Pillar of the Cage God is very cheap early on. Should be about 1C, 1 Alc, 2C at most. You should be able to buy it probably by Act 2, I would imagine. Maybe even in Act 1. It shouldn't be too hard to acquire. But before then, I would recommend doing the Fizz vendor recipe. I'm going to show this how it works real quick here. In game, I got the recipe ready. It's a rare rustic sash, a rare weapon, and a blacksmith whetstone. Early on, you want to look for basically the item that is your level. So you want to look for a two-handed weapon that's level 8 or level 9 or level 13. Basically, whatever level you are, you want to get the highest base type item level closest to you. That's generally going to have the best fizz. The axes are good, the staffs are good, the maces are pretty good. And then you want to try to accumulate some alchemy orbs and put 1 alch on your weapon, 1 alch on a rustic sash, or find those rare. And then doing the vendor recipe gives you a rare, or not a rare weapon, a magic weapon back with a percent fizz roll, which makes the base fizz damage much better. You'll see this one here says 22 to 65, whereas previously this was 14 to 42. That's a very big fizz damage increase. This is something you want to recommend, that I recommend doing early on. Also, another note is early gems are pretty important, so you want to prioritize good ones that make big value for the character. I'd recommend things like War Banner, Maim, and Ruthless are great supports early on. Ground Slam's a good option, Perforate's another good option. Kind of play with whatever you want, whatever suits your style best. These are just recommendations. At the end of the day, we're going to be switching into Boneshatter in Act 3. After that, movement skills like Dash is important, Leap Slam's important, and then Vitality is huge value early on. Those are kind of the early gems I'd prioritize, and I'd always recommend getting a Rustic Sash, Iron Rings. Those are high value early on for attack-based builds.
Take care.
Again, looking at the path, or not the patch notes, the path of building here. Hopefully that covers the early game for you guys, give you some insight on what to do early game. Other things we want to look at are our unique items we use. I put some recommendations here. Most of these items should be cheap. Cyclopean, this is something you're going to get later midweek because it's an Elder drop. It's a very common Elder drop. It'll drop in price very fast, but initially it's expensive early on because it's rarity, because it requires you to kill Elder, which people aren't usually doing very much on the first few days. Other stuff like Astramentis, I would look at Polymath cards. Those are important. They are a 1 out of 3 div card set. So if you want to just fractionally buy an Astramentis, you can buy your way up to it. It should be that Astramentis are going to be around the 15 to 20C range. They might peak at around 30C, 40C. That's what they did in Ultimatum. They shouldn't be too expensive, should still be very affordable, and a very high value amulet early on. Other things I'd recommend are the Meganord belt, and I said boots here, but it's Meganord gloves. These are very cheap uniques. Definitely recommend. They give you strength, they give you some flat fizz with the belt, they give you percent life with the belt. There's some value there. Belt of the Deceiver is decent as well. Alberon's Warpath, these should be cheap as well. They give you a bunch of strength. They go up to 18% increased strength. Definitely recommend those. And then other things for chess pieces, eventually want to get Iron Fortress, but this is a Prophecy chess piece, so it might be a little bit rarer early on. So you might have to settle for something like a Death's Oath, an Ambush Charge, a Belly of the Beast. These are all really solid options that should not be expensive early on. After that, for the helmet, the gloves, the maybe even chest piece, but honestly the unique chest pieces should be fine. The rings, you're going to be looking for rares with resistances in life. That's all we got there. Hopefully that covers the early stuff. I have some anointments here too, but these will, honestly, just beef. I should have included beef here. Beef is like 3 clears. It's like the cheapest anointment, 30 strength. You can't go wrong. These are all pretty decent anointments to look at in the future. They should be cheaper ones. So anyways, the note section here is for you guys for just some early information. Another thing I want to mention on that is very important to Boneshatter, which is a lot of the reason people are worried about playing Boneshatter, is trauma stacks. Trauma stacks do about 200 damage at level 20 to your character per stack, and I want to talk to you guys about how to mitigate that, what my plan is for it, and what we're going to be doing. And it all revolves around Unbreakable, armor stacking, and fizz reduction. Those are our 3 things that matter. To start off with, just looking at mitigating fizz damage with armor. Here's a little chart. You can look this up on the PoE wiki, but basically how it works is if you have something like 10 times the armor value of the physical hit, you're going to mitigate 50% of that damage. You're going to have 50% fizz reduction right there. So it varies based on how much armor you have and how hard you're getting hit. If we get hit for 10k and we have 100k, we're going to mitigate 5,000% or 5,000 damage. Whereas if we have 100k armor and we get hit by 1k, we're going to mitigate 90% of it. So the damage you take depends on how hard the fizz hit is. And trauma can stack pretty high, so we want a pretty good amount of armor. My goal right now is I want to be roughly able to mitigate 50% of it with armor, and I'm thinking I want to at least be able to get to 20 trauma stacks with armor with attack speed. That means attacking at least about 3 times a second is something I'm going to try to shoot for. We'll see what we can get it to. But in that case, we're going to need to mitigate 4,000 damage. So my goal mitigation for that is 40k armor. That way we can mitigate that by 50% there, and I can get another 40% fizz reduction from my endurance charges and a few other miscellaneous places like Pantheon. Stuff like that is what we're going to be looking at doing. Now, why do I want to shoot for 90% fizz reduction? Well, it all revolves around Unbreakable. Unbreakable is a node that red line there at the bottom says 1.5% of total physical damage prevented from hits in the past 10 seconds is regenerated to you as life per second. This node itself can make trauma actually end up net healing us. That's right, it can actually be a positive thing for us. And here's the quick math on it. If we mitigate 90% of the damage, we're going to be taking 10%. The value we're going to heal is going to be the 1.5% times that 90% of whatever X damage is that trauma hit is for, times 10. These are the 10 seconds where we're going to be regenerating. The reality is, I gotta stop saying that. Anyways, what's happening is, over the past 10 seconds, we hit ourselves with trauma a lot of different times, and in the current 1 second, we're getting health from all those previous hits we take. So the net recovery we're getting from the trauma hit we do is 13.5%, whereas we're mitigating 10% of it. 10% of it. So that end result is that we're going to have a net 3.5% recovery. So that's my main math behind why I want to get a decent amount of armor. That's why I want to mitigate a lot of the trauma, because it can actually be a net positive for us as a Juggernaut. Only Juggernaut can do this. Other ascendancies can maybe mitigate it, but they're not going to end up healing from it. Other things we're going to be looking into is we're going to have Overleech. We want to get Leech into the build. We're going to have Regen in the build. We're going to have other sustain besides just the trauma, but that's just another net positive to hopefully make this build really good at surviving and continuing to live on. You can see early on we do things like we grab the Leech node here. We can grab Leech in a few other places as well. We even do a decent amount of regen throughout the tree. So that's just stuff I wanted to tell you guys I was thinking about and give you basically an updated look into the build in case you guys aren't going to be able to follow on stream or aren't going to be able to watch me live and ask me questions about the build in real time. That way you can look at this and you'd have a good direction of what to go. I am going to be making a video each day I finish playing at the end of the day, so I can give you an updated guide, say this is where we are, this is how much it costs to get us here, this is how we're performing, and stuff like that. Moral of the story is I'm really excited about Boneshatter Jugg. I've had a lot of people be like, Boneshatter Jugg, it's just Heavy Strike. And it's not Heavy Strike. It's so much more. And I'm going to prove it. That's the plan, at least. I want to give you guys a good league starter, and I'm feeling really good about this one. Who knows? I could be smoking something. Maybe it's not that good, but I think it's going to be really solid. And I'm excited to get in there and level this build. Anyways, that's the update on the guide for you guys, so you guys have a lot of information about the build. Hope you guys have an excellent league start. And good luck out there, Exiles. Peace out, guys.